Welcome to the Coffey Code podcast, where we bridge the gap between technology and people through each informative episode. I'm your host, Ashley Coffey, technologist, two-time TEDx speaker, and CEO of Coffey and Consult. On this show, you'll hear exclusive interviews with experts, innovators, creatives, and business owners in the tech space and beyond. Whether you're a novice or a tech enthusiast, my goal is to excite, inform, and empower you to understand how the rapidly evolving world of technology impacts your daily life. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to another episode of Coffey and Code. I'm your host, Ashley Coffey, and I'm so excited to be joined by a special guest today, Dr. Rolando Masís-Obando. Welcome to Coffey and Code.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
So I know you're incredibly busy, and I'm going to share a little bit of your background with the audience so they get a better understanding of your background expertise into the context of our conversation that we're going to be having today, because it's very important, it's very timely, and it's very much in the intersection of technology and human rights and digital ethics. So Dr. Rolando Masís-Obando is a computational neuroscience postdoc at Johns Hopkins University. Scientifically, he is interested in how contexts, like those in virtual reality and augmented reality, shape the way we think and remember our day-to-day experiences. He has scanned dozens of people's brains and effectively read their minds to further understand how the brain represents spaces and concepts. And given the intersection of augmented reality, also known as AR, and VR, virtual reality, with neuroscience, Rolando's interests revolve around how we can shape a future internet to be more human-centered and grounded under ethical principles. Rolando received his PhD from Princeton University in computational neuroscience and his bachelor's from Yale University in molecular, cellular, and developmental biology. During his studies, he co-founded Shufflix with his brothers, the largest activity search engine at the time, to help people interact with their environments in a playful, alternative way, while also helping small businesses gain exposure. In his free time and the little amount that he does have, Rolando is a filmmaker, composes for films, creates augmented reality and artificial intelligence tutorials for his YouTube channel, which I will be sure to link in the show notes here. Welcome to the show, Rolando.
Thanks so much for having me, Ashley. I've seen all the really amazing people you've had on the show, so it's really an honor to be here too.
Thank you. And for those listening, a little bit of context, you and I actually met in person IRL at one of our favorite conferences called Augmented World Expo.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice to actually, be here 2 years later having a conversation with you. It's one of the beauties of VR industry is that we see each other every year.
Yeah, it's such a great conference and such a great group of people and I think for the most part, I think everybody there has like a very sort of communal understanding of shaping the future in like an ethical way, which is like really fun and really cool to be a part of because everybody's kind of has a shared mission, even though everybody is obviously building really cool stuff at the same time. So it's not stifling innovation in any way.
Absolutely. And with it being in Long Beach, it's just a great opportunity to get some sunshine, see new faces, familiar faces, and see what is the current state of VR, which is constantly evolving. But so I read off your amazing CV background of experience and how you have this very interesting intersection of neuroscience and ethics and research. So aside from your bio, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where to start. Like, this is always like a really hard question to answer. Like, who are you? I mean, I think that where should I begin? Are we are we going back to like as soon as I saw light into the world, or?
Actually, that's a good question. I'm curious. So, what got you involved? What got you interested in this specific field of neuroscience? What was that inspiration or aha moment that you had that you knew that this was the field for you?
Okay. Okay. So I think it comes in many different waves, and I think that my answer is going to sound like not something that's super related, but it is related. So when I was a kid, I think I remember very clearly watching some of the Jackie Chan movies, and it looked so fun. And at the end of the movies, there would be like the bloopers. And you'd see Jackie Chan and the other actors, just messing up stunts and then just laughing. And, as a kid, I'm like, wow, the film looks so fun. You get paid to have fun. And so that sort of started like this idea of sort of being playful with work and playful with what you do. And so that perspective kind of like should have shifted the way that I thought about careers and things in the world. I think that curiosity in sort of film and how stories are told got me into science. So also as a kid, I wanted to be a physicist all of a sudden, and because I was like,
Wow.
oh, the curiosities of the world, the universe, what is this thing, quantum physics? And I got really excited. Like as a kid, it was kind of like this weird. I'm looking back in retrospect, I'm like, why was I so curious? Because I would wake up in the morning and I would watch cartoons too, but I like something about going to the family computer when nobody was using it and with like a little notebook and really taking notes on like videos or articles that I had no idea what I was reading. I'm talking about like it was like weird quantum physics stuff, things about particles, and I had no idea what I was reading, but I was like fascinated, and so I just would take notes, not really
Wow.
knowing what was going on. And in that I started doing science fairs. Middle school, I did like this thing called like a cloud chamber, which allows you to like visualize cosmic rays, which are essentially like protons coming from Earth that like emanate from like black holes and like the sun,
Whoa.
things.
That's cool.
And then that got me even more excited. So then I also did things like this thing called sonoluminescence, which is when you basically trap a bubble through some sound waves, basically that are going through a liquid, and the bubble gets stuck in the antinodes of the wave, and the pressure, or at least like it sort of collapses in on itself. In the collapse, it gets really hot because tiny little micro bubbles start like being getting created, and it gets almost as hot as the sun, or as hot as the sun. I don't remember. It's been a long
Wow.
time. And so then like, okay, so physics, I was like what is like the mysteries of the universe? And then I thought a little bit more abstractly about, okay, wait, humans started coming up with these theories. Humans thought about these things. Humans are understanding the world. So then I got interested in the brain and what's going on in our mind that allows us to be able to understand things so abstractly. And then that got me into neuroscience eventually because I was like, okay, I'm going to start with biology. So that's why I did my bachelor's in that, because I wanted to, okay, to understand the brain, I feel like I have to understand things at the molecular level. And so then from then on, I've sort of gone up in the layers of abstraction into neuroscience, into what I do now, which is sort of trying to understand how I mostly focus on memory because I think maybe there's a saying in science that you focus on you study your own pathology. I always fear that I have bad memory, so I guess I like started studying it. Just I don't know. I also
Why
think it's
not?
yeah, it's also very interesting because it's like our memories are basically what builds us and to who we are in some sense. So yeah, and then okay, so then I've talked about like film, and then I talked about my interest in science, and then I think that naturally that also ended up in me feeling like a sort of urge and sort of desire to do things with entrepreneurship as well.
Mhm.
And honestly, like some people think that doesn't make sense, but I do have like a phrase that I do like that I use because I think it like brings it together. Because when I was doing fundraising for some startup stuff in the past, investors they always want like this like sort of obsessive, sort of really narrowly focused individual that, oh, this person can take it to like the end, and they see me as someone that's a little bit distracted because I have all these interests, I do all these things. But then I think this tagline sort of subdues like the doubts, because I think it's all related. Like I like filmmaking because it's about telling stories about the impossible. I like science because it's about discovering the impossible, and I like entrepreneurship because it's about building the impossible. And so I think to
Mhm.
me, like the sort of mysteries and curiosities of the world kind of align in all those ways. And so, yeah, I guess that's kind of the basic description of how I got here. It's just that curiosity, and I think that neuroscience and the brain is cool, and life is cool.
Absolutely. And one thing I want to highlight here is that you followed your passions and let your passions led you to kind of where those intersections started to come into to play. And I love that you mentioned that because I think some people get advice from mentors that might be positive or well spent, that you can't have more than one focus area if you want to be successful. But like you mentioned, those things are related and they augment one another in your
Mhm.
understanding of it. So hopefully people out there that have multiple interests can take some inspiration from what you just said.
Yeah. I I think that it's often because I actually was told often that you're getting distracted too much, you are
Me too.
focused too much, and it always felt, oh, this is like a bug, right? And then like, as I grew older, I was like, no, no, it's a feature, and I stand by that, even though even to this day, some people still say it's a bit of a bug, but I disagree.
It's a feature, absolutely. And because it provides you with different perspective and more informed perspective because you've had the experience of experimenting, trying things out, and just creating. and learning from that experience. And I think a lot of people have a hard time with that just creating piece of getting the ball rolling. But Rolando, so you've done some incredible research, and some of the research that you've done can be found online, which people can read more about that. But I'm curious, in terms of like the past of what you've seen change, what has been the most significant shift with the intersection of like neuroscience, human rights, and technology as we've seen it happen in real time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think that to some extent, like if it, the I guess the sort of neuro rights, I think is like maybe like a good encapsulation of the question there. For a long time, I don't think people really. It's when we're trying to understand the brain and trying to do experiments with animals or humans and trying to understand like what's going on. It was always like a sort of an attempt to understand and not so much an attempt to as okay, it's hard to describe because like as a technology, laws change over time based on the context, and so do our understanding of what merits certain rights. And I think that most of the time when you think about neuroethicists and neuro rights advocates, a lot of these people in some way have some understanding of the brain and like what we're capable in terms of research. And in addition to there's a science fiction and all these things, I think it's really hard for a neuroscientist to not ever think about a lot of the consequences of a lot about the research that we do. And most of the time, these consequences are good, right? If I'm trying to understand Alzheimer's, it's because I want to help people with Alzheimer's. I want to help, these like diseases that happen over time as we grow older. And there's like a lot of really good intentions. And the cool thing about that too is that it allows us to understand other things that we didn't know were possible about the brain, about the mind, about our biology. And as we understand those possibilities more and more, we start realizing that the degrees of freedom in how these mechanisms in our mind operate can both be enhanced in like a way to help people or can also be potentially misused, right? A tool can be both a tool to construct your IKEA desk, but it can also be used to like hurt someone.
Yeah.
I think like the intersection really comes from just like the step-by-step advances over time and our realization that laws tend to get outpaced by the changes in technology, and these changes often operate like laws operate in a more of a reactive way. Danger, okay, let's do corrections to make sure that that danger doesn't happen again. But I think we've reached a point of self-awareness in both our sort of in the scholarly way, but also in the sort of technological way, that we can be a little bit more preemptive about some of the ways that neurotechnology or just AI can sort of impact our life. And the neurorights sort of framework is a really good one because right now, at least in the United States and in many, many other countries, there isn't really fundamental rights to our neural data. And there have been attempts to sort of start getting at this with consumer protection laws, like, the GDPR is like one of these. It was like more of an EU thing. And then the California was like the first one, I believe. They did like the California Consumer Protections Act,
Mhm.
the PA. And that was a really good start. But it still is very lacking. Actually, to this day, right now, there's only 10 states with active consumer privacy laws. And why does
Oh,
that matter? I know it's like super old. It's the CCPA came out, I think, in 2020, I think, and then it's already been 5 years, and only 10 states have something. Maryland, that they already passed it, but it's not going to come into online, I guess, until the end of this year. I think October 2025 or something. And but okay, so this is great, right? Like there's like these laws that are happening, and we're trying to like think ahead about the dangers of invasive use of some of this technology, AI or some neurotechnology. But the focus ends up usually being around identification and general privacy, not some of like the important pillars that someone as a neuroscientist like me and someone that studies the brain and studies how we operate would consider like the most important ones. Identification is a sort of outdated privacy issue. It's not really about identification because you don't need to identify someone to be able to know a little bit about the neural data. You can like say, okay, we're not going to identify the person, but we're still going to use the neural data to say provide these ads that seem to be predictive of like their tastes of something, right? And so then you can start entering this sort of like tricky territory of manipulation
and involuntary disclosure.
and involuntary disclosure, right? And so a lot of these laws, the CCPA and the states, actually, there's like a big push for like I was reading the witness statements when like the Maryland equivalent of the CCPA was being written up, And a really great argument from one of the witnesses was like, oh, we have to make sure that we use the term biometrics to be consistent across the other ways that other states have defined it. And so that's also an issue, like being consistent across states. And right now, it's a little bit, the way that the biometrics is defined is not good enough because it doesn't really specify neural data as something very specific and very important. And so there's a lot of issues with how that's being prepared, but at the same time, it's also, technology advances super fast, but laws operate at the speed of pen and paper. And so in order to get this passed, you have to be able to like get people on board. So you can't be super specific and super nuanced, but at the same time, you should probably, yeah. So there's like a lot of issues with that. This is a very long answer to like the intersection of neuro and AI and technology, but I hope that's all.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. I followed every word of that. Thank you. And you brought up something that I kind of want to touch on here because it's something that's been in my mind. And of course, I'm not a neuroscientist. Biometrics. So let's make sure everyone knows generally biometrics. Metrics can be, when you're looking at your phone, how long are you spending looking at a particular part of your screen? Or are you blinking a lot? Particularly in eye tracking head mounted displays that are virtual reality, there's a lot of data that can be assessed there on if you're paying attention, heat mapping essentially. So would you consider biometrics in that same intersection of neuro rights because it's essentially information coming as a signal from the brain being
Yeah,
facilitated through.
I would, but it's interesting because it's hard to find like a really good definition for it because there's like things like your heart rate, your how much you sweat. There's a lot of different sort of measures that would fall under biometrics. I think neural data, all of these things in some ways are some sort of neural signal that's sort of expressed with the phenotype of I'm eye tracking. You can decode a lot of things from what people see, their pupil dilation and attention and things like that. And I think that regardless of how we choose to define biometrics, I think that a bigger problem, even though I did highlight that as a problem, that neural data is often not specifically included as a word or legal term to include when defining biometric information, um, is the sort of overemphasis on personal identifiable information as the only thing to worry about. Privacy is important, but you can do nefarious things without knowing who you're doing them to. And I
Sure.
think that that is not something that is often included in a lot of these consumer protection laws.
Why do you think that is? Is it good for business?
Well, because I think comes from like a misunderstanding of what is and what could be possible with technology. And I think that it's also just from precedence of privacy being a sort of fundamental part of society as like for individual rights. And that is important. And it's actually like bleeds into all the other things that I'm talking about. But it doesn't capture things like agency. You can have your privacy not invaded, but you can also have your agency affected. And that's why like the Neuro Rights Foundation has like really cool pillars that they bring up often. And I think one of them is actually the right for agency.
That's so important. And I remember, I think it was 2 years ago, there was a Bill of Rights ethics for AI specifically by the administration at the time. And I'm not sure where that's at. However, during that time, there was a lot of work of looking at what is working in the EU and how can that framework be laid on the US to try to find some overlap. And it's like all the progress stopped and came to a screeching halt. Meanwhile, the technology is rapidly advancing second by second. So all that to say is, yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, I mean, I mean, like that reminds me of like the classic example that I love to use because it just sort of really, really describes the sort of nuance in how specific sometimes one needs to be with how one defines law. And it's
Mhm.
uh, the example of the Fifth Amendment and the right of not self-incriminating. Right now, in many states, if you get are part of a crime, even if you committed it or not, doesn't matter. I'm just like speaking generally. The police, this is disputed still actively about whether. Okay, actually, I'll start with an example from I think it was like 1988. Am I getting the date wrong? Well, there's a Supreme Court ruling that said that a suspect cannot be forced to reveal the codes to a bank safe, and that's because revealing those codes could be a self-incriminating action.
Oh,
And so the codes, because they exist in the head of the person, counts as testimony. And so you can't force someone to testify against themselves. And so they were protected from revealing that from their mind. And so if
Wow.
you move on to the age of today, so the days where we have smartphones and they have pin locks. Right now, if your phone is unlockable via pin, like have to put the little code in it, then you are probably protected from with the Fifth Amendment from self-incrimination. If like a police officer says, "Hey, unlock your phone," like you don't have to because you have every right to keep that password in your head. However, what gets really interesting is it's a little bit more blurry when it has to do with biometric information. So, say, for example, if your phone unlocks with facial recognition or your thumb, that's biometric information according to like, these rulings, and that is not necessarily protected by the Fifth Amendment
What?
because your face and your thumb and your hands are physical attributes, not things that exist in your head. Therefore, they're not as protected. And right now, even to this day, like there's like a debate about whether that should right the Fifth Amendment should be extended to those kinds of things. So that's super
Oh
interesting, right?
my gosh. I didn't even know that. I just assumed it automatically extended to that.
No, no, no. And so that's how specific and sort of nuanced these things get. And that's why it's important. So if we are defining biometric information in like an act that's supposed to protect people from companies or even government, you have to make sure that you bring out the important keywords that matter. So neural information is something that does that. And Neuro Rights Foundation does knows this well, and so they've gone on and are working with some states to include that more specifically into some of these laws.
That's beautiful, and I'm gonna take a look at that to see if my state is on there. Probably not, but would love to, work towards that and encourage other people listening in the United States to take a look at that to see if your state is listed, and if not, try to do some work on that because that is so incredibly important, especially right now. Because as you know, Rolando, is like data is gold. Data is profit for a lot of companies, and there hasn't been a lot of regulation of data. And especially everyone wants to learn how to scrape the internet, right? For
Totally.
whatever purpose, whether it's their own GPT or their own business ideas. So I'm curious, can you speak to some of the ways to protect your neural rights as an individual in the current day and time? I know that's really vague, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
That's a really hard question because I mean, we've become sort of, there's like this sort of cyclical loop that it kind of exists where the technology that we use every day to be able to function and operate in society equally with other individuals with the same sort of privileges that one would expect that comes with technology. Right. Say, for example, the internet, having access to the internet, right? If I want to correspond with friends, I do have options. I can use the telephone, which involves going through, a networking company like AT&T, Verizon, whatever. I could also use Facebook. I could also use Instagram and all these things. And these are choices that I have affordances about how I can communicate with people that I care about, but it requires going through an intermediary. And the beauty of technology is that we have intermediaries now. We don't have to like write letters that take months to or weeks to get somewhere or days. We have all with this technology. And the hardest problem about this is that because these are corporations and they do profit off of the use that we make of them, and they should because they provided a service and we're using the service. It's really hard to disentangle. At what point do I want to like say no to the service because I want to protect things that are about me, but then I also sacrifice the service that comes with it. And this gets into like the very nebulous space of what is allowed, what a company is allowed to do when they provide a service. And that's why
Mhm.
things like the GDPR and all these other things started coming up because, hey, we should have the right to our own data, even though we are using your service, right? So if I want to delete my data, then I should be able to do that. And so these things have started to come into the foray. But there was actually a case. I don't remember the exact name, or I think it was like maybe like a couple of years ago, or maybe more recent. A lot of these cases just are in my head, and I can't remember all of them. But
That's amazing.
a rule passed where like you should have the right to delete your data, right? And I think this is true for for the EU at least, and like some things in like the CCPA and things like that.
Mhm.
But someone tested it. They're like, okay, this ruling passed, so I'm going to test it. And they, wore like the whatever device they had to use, and then they, tried to delete the data and they couldn't do it. They needed a premium account or something. They had to pay to like get access to be able to delete it. And so they sued the company and they won. And so,
Wow.
but they're like these are just like the sort of examples, right? Like all of a sudden, like my data is now paywalled. And so this is also interesting because like the FTC Federal Trade Commission is in charge of a lot of these things. And I remember I did some research like 2, 3 years ago, 4 years, 3 years ago. I don't remember when. And I actually try to like identify how many people work at the FTC, and I couldn't really find because I guess that's like sort of private information, it's governmental things. I don't know.
Like
But I
head
was able,
count?
yeah, head count.
Okay.
And I was able to identify that it was probably at the time, this is like 2000, 2022, maybe 2020, that there were maybe around like 50 people that were in charge of consumer privacy type stuff. And that's like very few people for a lot of companies in a country that's like over 300 million people. And that's a little scary. Like they have a lot to do. There's not enough. There's probably, I would argue that there's not enough people to be trying to like help everybody with stuff like this. And I'm not anti-technology. I'm not
Oh yeah.
anti-corporations. I mean, as I'm an entrepreneur, like, I totally, I think it's totally cool to have companies doing their things and providing services. But I do think that there is a space for doing things right and not,
Ethical.
yeah, protecting people's agency and their ability to operate in like self-determination.
Yes, and I worry that we're losing some of that, like with language learning models and applicant
Mhm.
tracking systems, and not understanding the ability for these tools that we're using to be trained on data that is previously existing. So, like, there's just a lot. There's a huge range when it comes to people's understanding of AI and neural rights and whatnot. It's just moving so quickly into such a it's a new world. It's a wild west. It's literally a wild west right now. And it's actually kind of exciting though, because there's a lot of innovation happening. We are really competing to, have the fastest whatever. But I'm curious, in your research and in your work, Rolando, what has been the most surprising insight that you have seen that has maybe challenged some of your preconceived notions of neuroscience?
Oh, I mean, well, I don't know if it's like my specific research. I mean, my research, I dabble in like a lot of these spaces of like, neuroethics, neuro rights, robot rights, or, a lot of these things that have a lot to do with the intersection of how humans relate with each other and how we relate together as a society and like the technological advancements and how they change that. I guess that's also just from the intersection of like the things that I'm care about, filmmaking, storytelling, neuroscience in general, and then also building services, products, or whatever. So there's that side. Then the research side that I do is related in a way because I do sort of adjacent to research adjacent to a lot of the technology that I talk about, like for like today and BCIs and things like that. But I think like one of the interesting insights um, that I, it's like it's hard to really like grab because every day is like filled with insights, so it's just hard to like find like just say just, oh, there's this one insight that just changed
Of
everything.
course.
Because
Maybe
I
something recently.
um recently, well, something that's often on my mind is actually some of the research that is performed by some of my colleagues that is very fascinating, and I think it's super cool, and it has like such great implications for humans, but also in the wrong hands could also be incredibly dangerous. And I find this work incredible. Yeah, it's really cool, and what they're doing is, and these are cool folks that are doing cool things that are not evil in any way.
Good.
But there's a lot of work in neuroscience now that has gotten better at sort of these models that are able to decode a little bit more liberally and abstractly than like traditional decoding that has been done in neuroscience in the past. So in like a lot of the work that I've done has been as more of like the more traditional machine learning type of decoding. And in neuroscience, in psychology, also just in science in general, it's people aren't most of the time, depending on like your research question, but like in general, you're not trying to come up with like the coolest, most crazy, computational model that will predict this or that. What people are trying to do is understand the mind, and so that means going at it from a very scientific method approach of, yeah, I have these ideas about how the brain works and I'm going to test them. And in order to test them, we need to create models that are explainable. And so oftentimes, more traditional machine learning methods, regression, and things like that allow us to be able to explain things a little bit more concretely. Like this effect, it does seem to cancel out this hypothesis or something like that. The thing with sort of how a lot of AI has transformed over the years is that neural network is becoming slightly more explainable in certain things, but it's quite complex. The distribution of the weights in how backpropagation works, and like in all the different optimization strategies that people perform, makes our understanding of what we're trying to predict a little bit harder to interpret. And so if I have a linear regression as like the most basic example, I have regressors, and I can test out whether how much those regressors help explain variance across some hypothesis that I have. With neural networks, you have layers of nodes. You kind of end up having to use the same analytical tools that you use to understand the brain on the neural network, and then like bring those together. And there's many analyses that one can do that are really cool. Some are very sort of as simple as correlations, but like the correlations are in multi-dimensional space that kind of tells you a little bit about the relationship. So say, for example, one of the cool, actually, you asked a question about what was cool. I think this was cool. I don't forget when this happened. This is 2014. This is all related to what I was saying earlier, but
Oh,
I
I know.
think it like, there's this really cool paper that really like caught my attention. I think it was 2016 or 2015, something like that. I could be wrong. 2014, 2017, I don't know.
What is
Well,
time?
it's somewhere in there. And they basically used a vision model, a neural network model, and they looked at the early layers of the neural network model, and then they looked at the middle layers and so on, and they up the layers before like the output, the prediction or whatever. And they wanted to understand what's going on in those early layers, middle layers, and they're able to show how the early layers, when like you show the model an image, say of like an elephant or something, the early layers detect the edges of the image.
Mhm.
Then the middle layers start creating like sort of like you can sort of visualize what they're detecting, and it's more of like the shapes that the edges come together. And then as you move up the hierarchy, you start seeing the higher up layers, they're sort of describing the general semantic information about what's in the image. And so that was very interesting because our brain does have a sort of hierarchical system like that. Early visual cortex, and how it spreads across the rest of the brain, does have processing that does sort of go move up in levels of abstraction. And I thought that parallel about how the neural networks were doing this and like how the brain is also doing it was really cool. And it provided insights about sort of the sort of similarities about how these algorithms are sort of finding these optimal sort of ways of understanding an image that our brain also seems to have done through different mechanisms, completely different mechanisms, but still, it's interesting. So that paper I thought was like really cool. And I think it sort of sets the stage for how a lot of these neural networks are so interesting and powerful, because there is really interesting ways that they deal with high dimensional information and abstraction that allow them to do the things that they do.
Wow. That is incredible. Thank you for sharing that. I'm definitely wanting to look into that because it's just pulling a lot of threads of interesting things that I didn't realize were possible. And I think the brain is something that will continue to be studied, years after we have gone. And will we truly know everything about it? Who knows? We're still developing deeper understanding of that. But I'm curious, in your research, have you seen developments around brain computer interfaces that are specific to neurorights? And let me like back up a little bit. The reason I'm asking this question is because there's a lot of hardware manufacturers that have been in the virtual reality space that have been trying to figure out how to connect these BCI, brain computer interface, to hardware. Some companies have achieved that. It's extremely expensive, but of course that raises a lot of security questions. So as a neuroscientist, what are your thoughts on that mechanism of BCI?
Yeah, so right, like BCI kind of comes in like mainly two flavors. There's like the non-invasive, and then there's the invasive. The invasive is really where like the sort of most major, kind of public knowledge stuff came out of, and like I think it was like was it the 60s? There was this guy that like put like a this had a radio connected to a remote control and was able to stimulate a part of like a bull's brain in order to make it stop. So he would go into like the little bull arena and like raise the flag. I think the scientist's name was Delgado, Jose Delgado. I think he would raise like the red, move. The bulls are stimulated by the movement, not necessarily the color, and it would run, and then he would click the button, and it would stop the bull. And so this a lot of people don't really know about this like really cool BCI experiment that happened many, many, many years ago. That was also potentially not the most ethical thing to do, especially for the poor bull. But it also shows you like a remote controlled brain controller. If I were to abstract it into something more simple like that,
Wow.
um, And so the space of invasive BCI is really interesting. And like, I think its largest and most beautiful utility is in helping people that have become paralyzed. And that space is like super cool. And there's a lot of really beautiful work, and the sort of ethical questions that are associated with that are important. But I think the major use of that happens in medical contexts, and it's
Right.
unlikely for the near future to occur for more commercialized use. And well, you never know. Things surprise me every day about what is regulated or not. So who knows?
True.
I think like Elon Musk has this idea of making neural or things like Neuralink, as simple as getting the LASIK surgery. You just go in, you're 30 minutes in and out. I think that that's like, to this day, it's like a little bit dangerous to do something like that. The issue that comes with that is that these implants, they can move over time, where our head is moving, like our brain kind of exists in like this sort of sort of liquidy space that kind of like moves and jiggles a lot around a lot. The uh, implants can move, and the designs have been optimized and changed, and there's a lot of really cool new designs that would try to prevent this from happening. But it's still a little bit too dangerous to like say, hey, I want to enhance my vision, can you just put a brain chip on me? And so, in that sense, I think that the space of neuroethics and things like that is not it matters, of course, but it is already contained within like a very well supervised medical framework that protects the patients really well, or tries to at least, versus like something a little bit more commercialized. Now, the world of non-invasive BCIs is a different story. In this, we have technology like fMRI, but like that's mostly safe for neuroscientists or psychologists who have grants that can pay for like the $1,000 for per every like 30 or 1 hour scan. So it's like expensive. It's expensive to maintain an MRI machine. It's not likely that your everyday person is just going to go to an fMRI machine and have unethical things happen to them, especially because in science we have IRBs. We have to follow rules. We have to really care about the privacy and like the ethical considerations about every particular experiment. Our experiments have to go through a review board before they're approved for us to recruit subjects. It's a whole process.
IRB. Yeah, I
Yeah,
used to have to do those city social behavioral modules in order to be able to list myself on a contract. I know what you mean.
there you
It's
go.
a lot
Yeah,
of things.
yeah. And so then, but then you have the consumer sort of non-invasive BCIs that, are a little bit more available, like EEG systems that are becoming more and more prevalent. And right now, EEG, like sort of analyzing EEG data, is still, EEG has not really changed. Like the technology itself has not really changed in like, decades. It's still the same electrode, still trying to get access to the brain. Hair can still be a problem. You can try to use gel to help, increase connectivity. There is some changes like dry EEG electrodes that you don't need gel, but then they also have other problems, and then there's still motion artifacts and things like that. But what has changed and what has evolved is our methods of analysis. Our methods of analysis are way, way more sophisticated now. And so there's a lot more that we can do. I think that the world of non-invasive BCI is going to be an interesting one on the sort of the angle of like what is going to be ethical. Apple patented ear EEG, like some ear EEG thing, I think last year or 2 years ago. Ear EEG is like still like not a super novel like field, but like it is something that people have been exploring for a while now. There's different types of ear EEGs. You have ones that kind of cover the ear, around the ear, other ones that you kind of put it in like near the inside the ear, and like with the readouts that you can get from that are still like, is there like really like dangerous information that can be read out of that? Not it's still to be seen. I'm not super familiar with this research, but I'm aware of it. But there is really cool research, and I think that there are startups moving in the direction of sort of more of, I gave out the distinction of like the early sort of machine, like the traditional machine learning to understand things, and like how using deep neural nets is not the best way to try to understand the brain, because then we have to add layers of complexity to sort of make connections between them. But there is research that does and has been able to do pretty sophisticated decoding of people's thoughts. When they're watching something, you can sort of predict what they're watching with like 50 to 60% accuracy. And this is from papers that came out like 2 years ago. So it's not, it's newish, but like, things advance pretty quickly. You can like have people think silently, and you can sort of read their thoughts. An interesting finding of this paper though was that if people try to like not have their mind read, they could sabotage the decoder. So that was cool. And yeah, so maybe we do have some power, but I have some thoughts about that. And then there's also really other really, really fun, really cool research by other colleagues that's more in the space of reconstruction, where if can you reconstruct like what is in your mind's eye sort of thing. And there is like progress in that, and that's really cool research. But you can imagine in the wrong hands that could, be very
Oh
disastrous with
my
privacy.
gosh,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, this the neuroscience is just like an incredible field, and like one of the reasons why I started that conference with my brother and a faculty at Princeton, Justin Jungi, is that neuroscientists, we've thought about a lot about, we think about science fiction, we talk about it, we think about, what's what our future look like with this or that. And I think that oftentimes, like, we do things ethically in our little space, in our little academic world, but then, someone reads the paper, which is like, public domain usually, and then they'll, do some product with it, and then that will like lead to issues and things like that. So a lot of like the research that's done by scientists ends up being commercialized in some way by some company or some startup that at first probably has good intentions, but then like things sort of snowball in some way that makes it not super great. And so the neuroethics and future reality was like this, like, okay, let's bring together academics who often, like, we stay in our little academic conferences. Well, some of them are really massive, like 30,000 plus people, so they're not little, but we stay in our little world, and then the industry people, they stay in their little world. And like, I often rarely ever see like a conference that kind of brings these two together. And the idea was like, let's bring leaders that are in industry, let's bring leaders that are in academia, and let's have them talk to each other, but also talk to like the public, and then see if, like, hey, we have to think critically about these things, and like, we can't just like build stuff without thinking about whether like we're doing it the right way. And so that the first iteration of that conference was a huge success, and I think like it did start rolling the ball, but it was small, right? And like, you can't really do too much when it's not at scale. And getting funding for these kinds of things is actually much more difficult than it seemed at first. But yeah, uh does that
Wow.
answer?
It
I just
does.
went to
Yes.
the right.
I love that. I love that. I'll send this to you later, but I was invited to this past summer. It's called the Dog Stole Seminar. It's in Germany, and it's a blend of industry and academia and neuroscientists. And it's invite only. I think they keep it to 20 to 30 people, which is the
Oh,
blend of academia, industry, and whatnot. And it's an entire week of talking about this type of stuff.
beautiful.
Right? I'm fairly certain it's grant funded. I know Cornell Tech had a play in some of it. Dr. Sherry Eisenkot, she's the leader of XR Access Initiative. She plays a part in that too. But I think that's something that could intersect in what you're currently doing that is existing, and it could be interesting pollination, cross pollination.
Totally. I would love to learn more about that. Yeah.
I'm curious. So let's say pie in the sky. What does the future look like for Rolando? What is the next 5 years for you? What do you hope to envision? And what do you hope to contribute with your expertise and knowledge and ability to really bridge that gap creatively amongst art and science and really all the stems?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think that maybe if you had asked me this a year ago, or maybe like, I don't know, 6 months ago or something like that, my answer would be very different. Right now, I don't think I can give you an answer, because
That's
I
okay.
think things are shifting very quickly. And yeah, I don't have an answer, but I think that, like, as you saw from like all the things that I talked about, I really much enjoy sort of this intersection uh of like what the future is, how we can change the future in a positive way. I mean, one of the things that I'm going to be working on is going to another iteration of this conference. Hopefully, we'll be able to manifest one this year. It's going to be much smaller scale, and it's going to be a little bit more focused, maybe more focused on leg- and then we did apply for some grants, some big ones that we hope that we can get, so that we can do a much bigger one in 2026. And then, of course, I'm always interested in technologies. There's always like a few projects there, whether they are for educational purposes, teaching someone how to, like, the other day, like 3 days ago, I made a new tutorial on how to use Meta's pass-through camera access that they just announced like a few days
I
ago.
saw that you had a tweet about that, but I
Yeah.
couldn't read it because I'm not on X.
Oh yeah. I mean, maybe I wouldn't have posted there, but I did, just because I was posting things in other places. So I was like,
But
whatever.
I wanted to read the rest of it. So what was so they took away the pass through and
No,
then
no,
I think it
they added, so the pass through was always there, but the access to like the webcam information was restricted for good reason. Actually, I think it's important probably to do that, and it's going to be interesting how they navigate like access. And like, right now, you can't publish a game with that uses the camera access,
I thought
but
about that.
it might change. But anyways, I like did a little quick test where I ran Stable Diffusion. I ran the camera feed through Stable Diffusion to see how like my reality would change, and it was really trippy. It was like low resolution, it was laggy, and like it was definitely there's no depth because I was only getting like webcam feed from one eye, so that it had all these limitations. But even then, when I was like moving my hands and like doing stuff and it was being transformed in pseudo real time, it was eerie. It felt weird and interesting. For me, I have such great use for this and understanding memory and like how we can enhance memory and all these things with this ability now that they've given developers. But I can also see someone kind of misusing this and like kind of breaking into people's privacy by getting access to the camera feed, this and hiding it in terms of some service that they're performing for something else. So it's interesting how that's going to turn out. But yeah, so I'm going to continue doing that kind of stuff and maybe some entrepreneurial things. We'll see. Like I'm very flexible and open about everything.
And I think Lynn, I need to like just go ahead and put it out there. And I think I need to just take that question out of my question bank because we are living in different times right now. And I want to be very like, just call it out what it is. It's different times and science is hard. And it's up to people like you to continue this work. Know that, I'm a big supporter of what you're doing. And I'm sure a lot of listeners are as well. But there is a threat right now to be able to continue some of this innovation. So sending you good vibes and all the best possible things so that you're able to continue to innovate and that your colleagues are also able to continue to innovate and not be distracted by, things that are going on that are unfortunate. But this is all like, changing. And I love the adaptability that you have here and your knowledge is so, so specific. I cannot wait to watch what you do next because you have such a good ability to just hop around, but also not just hop around unintentionally. You're actually connecting them in some way, shape, or form, which can be very difficult to do. But you're doing it because you're literally chasing that curiosity, which is your passion. And I applaud that because I think a lot of the younger generation has that destination in mind, but isn't really thinking about that journey,
Mm.
which can be more important to get you where you want to be. And that's something my mentor told me a long time ago.
I love the journey. Like if I'm going doing a road trip, I'm like the fun part is like being in like the car and like stopping at some random place to pee or whatever. Like that to me is like the fun part. The sort of yeah.
The mundane is not mundane. It's actually
Yes,
fun.
yeah, yeah.
I 1000% agree. Yeah. Well, Rolando, so for everyone listening, where can they come find you to stay abreast of your latest research, info, tutorials on YouTube? I'll be sure to link some of it in the show notes, but tell us what you got.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the classics. I don't really do much on Instagram, but I do communicate on there with friends and things. That would work. So XRMASISO, it's almost so. And then YouTube, I kind of post there sporadically, just when I kind of feel like it, because kind of just do it as for fun. And then I guess LinkedIn, if sometimes I'll post academic stuff, but I guess Blue Sky is where I would post more my
Yeah,
science
me
stuff. If someone's
too.
interested in blues in like science, then I'll my science stuff goes on in there.
Okay, good to
That's where
know.
like the academic Twitter moved,
It's
science Twitter
transplanting.
moved to yeah, Blue Sky. Yeah.
Which to me, that was some of the best parts of Twitter was that to me, the academic space and the
Mm,
comedian space. But
yeah,
plus
sure.
I love that Blue Sky is built on AT protocol.
Mhm.
Also female CEO, just a lot of good things. I know Jay Graber, who's currently the CEO, she was appointed by Jack Dorsey in 2021. I heard her
Mm.
speak at South by Southwest and really a company that's built on security, privacy, and like really building something ethical that's new. So I'm really rooting for them and hoping that they are able to stay competitive in this world.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah. So I always like to ask people like one random question that's relative to your experience and your expertise and kind of like, pop culture society. So as a neuroscientist and a technologist, Rolando, my question for you is if you had the ability to sever your mind between personal and work, would you do it?
Definitely not. Definitely not. Yeah, I mean, just like I used to. I've never really been able to do the work-life balance thing, even though I do think that's important. I think like what's important is to make sure that you do take time for yourself and for the people that you care about. And so when I talk about work-life balance to other people that are coming into like doing a PhD and I say, hey, important to create that balance, I mostly mean it, hey, take time for yourself. But I struggle with like dividing them properly because I think that for me, it's kind of like this like work-life continuum. Sort of, it's
Yeah.
all sort of integrated. Yeah, it's very, I'm almost never bored. If I don't think I can remember last time I was bored because there's always something. So no, because if I severed it, then I would like not I would like not be able to function. I would not be me. Like I don't know, I would just evaporate.
I love hearing people's reaction to that because I've heard, that there's just no such thing as balance. It's more about creating a harmony that works for
Sure.
you. And as someone who is deeply interested in multiple topics that also intertwine with your personal profession, there's really no like hard line. They're both very integrally aligned with one another. But the benefit of that is it's fun to do work because it doesn't feel like work. Not all the time, sometimes.
Sometimes it's true.
Yeah, I'm interested to see where that goes, if they're going to explore transferring consciousness. These are the things that I think about, laying in bed at night. At what point are we already there? We just don't know it.
You should check out organoids research.
Organoid,
Yeah, that's
definitely.
an interesting space.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I always,
you'll be like, what the fuck? It's like really interesting and cool, but also kind of scary.
I cannot wait. Organoids allow investigators to recapitulate morphogenetic events in human development that lead to tissue and organ formation. What? Wow. Okay. Thank you. I know what my rabbit hole is. That's awesome. Well, Rolando, this has been a really wonderful conversation, and I really appreciate your adaptability with the questions. I know sometimes it's easy to talk about these things, sometimes it's not, but you make these topics really approachable and engaging, and I'm really excited for everyone to listen, learn something new, follow your research, and really feel like they are an active participant in this world because we are our own historians, we are our own advocates for ourselves, so we do have to advocate for what's right and true.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thanks so much for having me. This has been a total treat. It's like today was like a long day, and then this has been like, this has been great.
Oh God, that makes me so happy. And likewise, like these conversations fill my cup, and doing it for 5 years, I really had to ask myself, am I doing it for the right reasons? Am I still having fun with it? Is it still educating people? And if it hits those things, then we're good. And the beauty of VR is I get to meet really cool people like you. And I'll see you in June, right?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so down.
I'm excited. Well, I'll make sure to put everything into the show notes. That way everyone who is listening can follow along. And I look forward to seeing what you do next, Rolando. Thank you.
Yeah, and one last thing. I saw that in the first one of the in like the episode where you interviewed Bobby, you guys talked about friendship bracelets. If you guys get some, I want to be I'm in on this.
Okay. Beautiful. Okay, I'm coming to AWE with friendship bracelets, and we're gonna do like the Swifty thing where you do this and you like
Oh
transfer
yeah,
it
that's
off
so
to
cute.
someone. I think that originated from raves, I learned.
Oh yeah. That makes sense. Love me a good rave.
ADHD, good times. But yes, we'll get you on that friendship bracelet train. Bobby's amazing and another great individual in the XR space who contributed a lot and been a supporter. So I appreciate people like you that are community over competition. So I look forward to seeing you in June in California.
Same.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Coffey Code. Your support means everything, so be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube for more insights, updates, and behind-the-scenes content. Stay curious, stay informed. Until next time, stay hydrated and do something nice for someone.